Hi, this is Zena Harris.
And I'm Mark Rabin.
Welcome to the tie-in. So today we're talking with Marian Wihak, and she's a production designer. I'm looking forward to talking with her because she just every time I've known her for a while. Every time I talk to her, she always has this really fresh perspective, and she's just out there doing things. And she has said to me before, like, this isn't rocket science. So I hope she
Mhm.
like expands a bit on that. I'll ask her. And I just really like talking with creative people who are doing things a little bit differently than,
Absolutely.
kind of the status quo. And she's one of those.
Yeah, it's a little different take from some of our past conversations that we've had around like hardware and power and other angles on the sustainability lens. Um, Versus this reminds me a lot of um, the book Cradle to Cradle by Michael Braungart and William McDonough from like I think 2010, and they really do talk about the designing the use of end use of products or designing the right to repair, right? Or things like that. So
Yeah.
I think there's something really, really interesting here that I look forward to hearing about.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, let's dive in. I'm sure she's got a lot to say. Hi, Marion, and
Hi,
welcome
Zena.
to welcome to the Tie-In podcast. We're
Thank you.
excited to have you. This podcast is about elevating the voices of the people doing amazing work behind the scenes. And you've been on my mind since we have been talking about this and prepping this podcast and all. So I'm really happy to be talking with you now.
Well, I'm really thrilled and honored to be invited as a guest onto your new podcast. So thank you to both of you and Mark.
Yeah, nice to meet you, Marian. We've not met before, so this is a real pleasure.
Mhm.
Yeah. So, Marion, you are a production designer. And that's a position that like I've always thought of as critical to sustainability, because you're one of the first people on, and you have the chance to kind of you know think through and influence the sustainability of production. At least that's how I understand it.
We also
Do
make a lot of stuff.
Yeah, I mean, do you feel the same way? Do you feel like you have that
Mhm.
influence in the
That's,
beginning?
I don't know, if influence, we try to, but I think the reality is between the art department and construction, we make a lot of stuff, especially if you're building sets. So in a way, it's the most obviously um, potentially wasteful department, potentially. Yeah. So.
Potentially. But there's a rethink, or a reframe, that can happen.
Yeah, like setting the tone for the production as well, and like yeah, the narrative tone, and also the use tone, and then yes, as we're shifting towards sustainability, the sustainability tone to get that conversation started right at the outset.
Marian, I'm curious, what got you into the film biz, and also how did you come into sustainability in the film biz?
Well, the first part of your question goes way back. I've been doing it for like what 40 years. And I studied in theater, and that's what I thought I would do, and visual art. But at a young age, I kind of got a job at CBC and started working in the design department there, which kind of then segued into films at CBC, and then I left CBC. But I'll come back to that later because those early years at CBC, where there was very much I didn't call it this at the time, but there was very much a circular model and flow of material use, partially because of the infrastructure of the organization, which I think is a prescient thing to talk about later on. But anyway, that's where I started. So in a way, even though it wasn't through the lens or in the thinking of sustainability, those were some of my earliest influences. And when you're in the beginnings of anything, whether it's life in a new city or life in a new job or something, those influences remain very crystal clear and strong, I think. So anyways, they're very clear recollection of what that system was. So anyways, I happened to get a job, a summer replacement job on the Tommy Hunter show at CBC way back when. And then I just have carried on doing this and primarily work on films. And I really like working on smaller independent, often Canadian, not exclusively projects. And so that was the first part of your question is how long I've been doing it or how I got into it. And I didn't just fall into it. I somewhat fell into film and TV, but I did have training and I steered my boat towards creating environments, for narrative scripts. So that has been like in the crosshairs since I was like in 2021. And then how it shifted into sustainability. Again, I won't go into the CBC explanation at this point, but what I will mention is that often when, because I was working on, often independent, smaller projects, and you couldn't just buy your solutions. But I had big ideas. I wanted things to look really great, so I would just find ways to do it where I could do it inexpensively. And that going back like 24 years or so, again, not through the lens of sustainability, it was just aesthetics and economy. At the time, there were starting to be, architectural pickers and finders, and it wasn't a style trend, a home style trend like it is now. But back then, it was just, people who saw the value in whether it was old mantelpieces, old windows, old doors, that kind of thing. And there was a few of them around Toronto here where I live, and so I would go to them, and literally, I would. It was fantastic. I would rent or buy, depending on what the deal the vendor wanted, everything from like wall paneling to banisters to staircases, mantelpieces, doors, windows, that kind of thing. Because we just didn't have the money to custom make those kinds of things. But those kind of, handcrafted, architectural gems really brought a lot of detail and attractiveness to a set that I couldn't otherwise afford to do. So. And oftentimes when we were done with it, if it was for a short-term project or even if it was for a series, I would keep tabs on stuff. Or when I first, arranged to, buy these architectural elements, for example, from a vendor, I would say, like, when we're done with them, will you buy them back? So it just became something that I just had in my kind of personal conscientiousness, I suppose, or feeling of responsibility that you just don't want these things to get trashed. So that was just kind of something that was built into the into my process. It's like, find some really great stuff, make sure it's still in the world when you're done with it, and then in more recent years it has become more articulated and focused through the sustainability lens with not a different value but just even more value.
I just have a quick follow-up to that. Do you think it has to do in the early days to more of these sort of shoestring Canadian budgets as well? Because
Well, sure, that's what I was working on.
Yeah, exactly, right.
I've worked on big Hollywood shows, I have, but I personally, I really I steered my boat, smartly or unsmartly towards the more independent things.
Yeah.
And we often didn't have very little money, and so you're trying to get a good, big aesthetic look that suits the story, not just for showman's sake, but without not a lot of money to do it. Yeah, so sure, that's a big driver.
Yeah, so that that kind of goes to this idea of, problem solving and being resourceful as a filmmaker. And it sounds like, with the sort of constraints on finances, it really kind of forced you to, tap into that problem solving and resourcefulness kind of mindset and mode, right?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, as any designer, whether you're on a small budget show, medium budget, or large budget show, doing things within budget or on budget is an MO. Like, you can't just pretend it doesn't exist. So this isn't exclusively something that is a mantle that people on low budget shows wear. It's just a slightly different mantle, but it's somewhat relative. You sort of always spend what you can, but in a way, if you wanted a good look, like, whereas a larger budget show, they can buy the look. And again, going back to what I said earlier, if you don't have much money, you can't just buy the solution. So that's where you really have to be, everyone has to be inventive, even on the big shows, and innovative. But I think on the small shows, there's just that extra necessity because you just can't buy the solution. You can't custom make it. So
Mhm.
that, for me, that was my approach,
Okay. Okay. Well, this kind of leads into exactly one of the things you've said before is that this isn't rocket science. Like, thinking in this way or material reuse isn't necessarily hard. And you just kind of described a bit of your approach, but is there any more to that? Have you like come up with a process or a way of doing it over the years of kind of thinking this through?
You mean in terms of doing something more sustainably, like a very conscious?
Yeah, thinking sustainably or
Yeah.
reusing.
Yeah. So, and there are certainly, there's lots of shared information about strategies, tactics, all that kind of stuff, methodologies out there. And yeah, I'm part of the National Directors Guild of Canada Sustainability Committee. And a couple of years ago, we put together a website, DGC Green, which check it out if you haven't. There's lots of good information on there. And each department, you know, system directing, locations, art department, every department that is represented by the guild came up with a list of kind of top tips to kind of get people engaged in like, this is not so hard. This is all you have to do to kind of get the ball rolling. And I was very involved along with Astor Burka in kind of coming up with the art department top tips. And so even though they were often reflecting ideas that she and I maybe had for years, but just they're things like plan ahead, like before you start just designing in and just without even any thought about what's going to happen at the end, take that into account. And as you're designing, think about how things are going to come apart. So design modularly, and don't use glue, use screws. Sort of use both thinking processes and actual processes that will actually make that kind of way wrap session an easier thing to have. So there's again, DGC Green, top tips, art department. We can see kind of a few of the strategies, and a lot of it is just common sense, and it's not hard. It's not like you have to hire a consultant or anything like that. Yes, sustainability consultants on shows are great to help kind of get everyone on board, but within the art department, we the last couple of shows I've done, I've embraced very easily specific strategies like the ones I just mentioned. And there's others as well, but those are some of the first ones. Is think about what you're doing and think about what's going to happen to things at the end. And again, design modularly, think about deconstruction right at the outset. Doesn't mean that you have to do everything like a box. No, it doesn't inhibit creativity. It's part of that just thoughtfulness in advance, not just the design thoughtfulness, but just the sustainability thoughtfulness and what can be made use of after the fact. So,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
mhm.
And the way you describe it makes so much sense. And, you're doing it and all. I'm just curious, like, you know, I'm out there talking a lot to people. You talk to a lot of people. Um, there always seems to be someone who kind of pushes back on the idea that you're describing and says, well, we don't have enough time, or well, we didn't have enough budget for this thing, or whatever. I mean, you can insert an excuse. And I'm just curious, when you hear that, knowing that you have done this and you do it on your projects, when you hear those kinds of things, what's your reaction? What do you think? What do you feel about that? I mean,
I mean, of course, part of me feels like like saying that's crazy. It's not so hard because and usually I'll probably say something a little bit like that, but if they're feeling confronted by a lack of time or like things go rush, and again, it's not like on the three projects where I've kind of been very conscientiously implementing sustainability strategies, design, circular design build, and sustainable strategies. It isn't like there aren't moments where it's like, oh, you kind of like get the pressure of the moment. It isn't like it sort of it puts you into Zen state or anything, and everything calms down
sure.
accordingly. But I think again, just the amplifying, like it's not so hard. Just spend that extra half day or day thinking about what's going to happen to everything at the end, and and having that conversation, bringing your team together, and finding out what you can do together. Because I found that especially the younger people, for the most part, are like, yeah, they're so happy when you say that that's just what you want to do. That's been my experience on both, all three shows that I've done, where I've kind of said, let's do this, guys. That has been very much embraced, especially by the younger people in the art department. Some of the older ones are like, no, I gotta, print my script, or I have to do even something like that. Like, we don't print scripts hardly anymore. Like, the productions don't print scripts anymore. So that's just kind of one shift that's happened. But one of the projects which I've done a case study for, I did in Winnipeg a few years ago, the construction manager, construction coordinator, he was older, he'd been in the business for probably 30 or 40 years, but he'd been just like so eager to do something sustainably. He'd been trying to do it within his role for years, but he just hadn't really, everyone who just said, no, we don't have time for that, don't think about that. But there are people that are willing to do it. So going back to your question about, if people say, can't do that, don't have time, don't have money. I think in a way, just the education of just even talking them through a few of the strategies that they could adapt, and encourage them, that it isn't so hard, and point them towards the DTC Green website or the case studies we've done. Yeah. So, I mean, education is a big part of the normalizing of all of this.
Yeah.
Because going back, it's not so hard. It's not rocket science. It's not like learning how a new camera works, or how new digital technology works. And also, what's interesting is, yes, you do have those conversations. People go, "Oh, I don't have time for that." It's like, you're already doing it. You have to do things economically. If you're on a series, you're probably already trying to make use of existing materials that you've already had, so that you can turn one set into another. A lot of the stuff you're probably already doing, and somehow the label of having to do things sustainably has obfuscated that fact of things that you're actually already achieving. So, like, I think the goals of doing things economically, thriftily, creatively, all of that is still there, and most people, most designers I know, that's what they do all the time. Sure, there are some shows, the really massive ones, where they kind of custom build everything, absolutely everything. But even the larger films, often one set has to be turned into another one. So, so I think the new quotient is, what's happening at the end? What are you doing with all this stuff at the end? Think about
It's
that.
a cradle to cradle mindset.
Yeah, exactly. Like, think about it. Think about it at the outset.
Designing the outcome.
Yeah.
Beautiful.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, you mentioned this the Directors Guild of Canada and the website, and you have collaborated with them on a couple of case studies. And I think you may have mentioned one just a second ago. You didn't say the name of it, but the kind of two most recent productions you were on, Warrior Strong, which is a Canadian feature, and Bed Rest, which is an independent US feature film, right? Can you just give a couple of highlights of each? And then for the listeners, we will put the links to those in the description, and we'll probably have our producer Colin edit them into the YouTube portion, so folks can see a bit. But can you just help us understand a bit about how you approach those, maybe what a couple wins were related to each of those projects?
Yeah, like, so Bed Rest, I mean, I've done a few projects since then, but those are the two that I've actually done case studies, which are
Okay,
to look
gotcha.
at. And they've been, and now through the Directors Guild of Canada, they've organized it into a graphic so that you can share that with people. So Bed Rest was an American independent feature, as you mentioned. It was medium budget, $12 million, which isn't huge, but it was decent size. We've got to build some sets, etc. And that's the one where the construction coordinator I'd mentioned was older, but was dying to have done something like this for years. So anyway, I gathered everyone together and said, listen, guys, let's do this. The younger members in the art department, both in the art from proper set decoration, props wasn't in that meeting, but construction was. They were really keen. And one of the biggest bumps, and it wasn't even a bump, it was just that I felt I needed to tell the line producer that I was going to be doing this. And that line producer was a very experienced senior industry person from LA who'd worked on very, very large projects like Jurassic Park and some other ones of that scale. But he was working on this one, I think, partially as a kind of, he was working with some friends who'd started a smaller independent company. And I think he maybe just as kind of like taking a graceful, just a graceful exit from the film industry, but yeah, not completely. Anyway, very experienced man. And I just went up to him beforehand and said, this is what I'd like to do. Because again, a lot of people say producers won't let us do this, or until producers say we can do this, we can't do anything, that kind of thing. And he just said, as long as it doesn't cost me more money, I can do whatever I want. And so
there you go.
Right.
so basically I said, okay, fine, that's what I'll do. And I mean, yeah, so that's kind of was the MO from him, and we did that. So on that show, again, the people that were drafting the sets, I advised them to do everything modularly. Again, things fall into 4x8, 4x10 panels anyway, because that's what sets are, or flats are. But we just tried to eliminate all the special little bitty pieces, not exclusively, because the room has to have some kind of interest to it. But we also we rented, instead of buying subfloor, there was a warehouse in town that had subfloor that we could rent that would be mostly used, I guess, on location shoots. But so that was a savings. We just rented the subfloor. But our main set was supposed to be in a large kind of Edwardian Beaux-Arty house, and the exterior was a real location. And like as an example, the windows on the real location were, let's say they were 3'10" wide, and we just made them 4 feet wide, like so that we could just standardize again the rhythm of modularity in the built set in the studio. Nobody's going to know. There's going to be curtains there, and again, it's the camera's moving, actors are moving. You just aren't going to see that. So just making those kinds of decisions, like balancing. When can we do this really easily? And when do we have to be a little special and build that special thing? So those were a couple strategies we did. And also we started documenting the set, as a lot of people do anyway, as it was getting built. So that as soon as we kind of had stuff to look at, we could also start letting people know this is going to be available in 6 weeks' time.
There you go.
And as that was happening, Winnipeg is it's a growing, but it's a smaller industry. But I think the head carpenter knew he was going to be going on to another show, and as soon as he knew that was happening for sure, he kind of put his name on quite a few of the flats. And the subfloor was rented, as I said, so it just went back into the warehouse. The environment, to give interest to the set, kind of going back to my story about getting things from architectural pickers and finders, so that there are interesting art elements to the set that we couldn't afford to custom build. We did that. We went to the secondhand stores and antique stores and things like that, and bought cupboards and shelving units and things like that. But we embedded them into the set so they looked like built-ins rather than just furniture stuck up against the wall. But they were easy to come out, and then people either bought them after, or in some cases we returned them to the vendor, and also the person that rented us all the subfloor took some of those in exchange for the rent of backdrops and subfloor. So there was a bit of a kind of active bartering system, which again is part of the film industry. Set decorators and do it all the time. So anyway, it was just that was kind of the process for that. And then in terms of the win, because we didn't do an absolute metrics on it, like we weren't tracking it, the carbon tracking or anything like that, but just from experience, this very experienced construction coordinator determined that we probably saved about 60% of our materials.
Wow.
And that his I can't really figure out the top of my head, but like let's say he typically would have had maybe 4 large bins, to go to the dumpster or go to the dump at the end. I think we had 2 small ones, maybe not even that much. So there was a quotient of how much he'd saved in terms of the typical waste from a project of that size and a build size. And plus, we because of the bartering and selling things, we made $5,000 on top of it. So.
Exactly. And one thing further is, everybody thinks, oh, this is going to take more time, right?
Yeah.
And it's not true.
Well, it can be, but again, the construction coordinator, Ed Preston's his name, by the way, in Winnipeg, and he built that. He did screw things mostly together, some things that we learned, but he built that into his schedule, right? That he needs so many people at the end to do this, and in the end, again, they did not take excessive time. Partially, I mean, they can, but as Joe Mandziak, someone who I've worked with on this subject matter of sustainability and circular design for years, he's a construction coordinator in Toronto. And as he's pointed out, they have to deconstruct things to a certain point anyway to get them into the bins. They have to chop them up and stuff. So it isn't just like you take the set and into the bin.
Right.
There's a degree of disassembly required anyway. So rather than doing it with like saws and just tearing it apart, get the screw gun out. So yeah, in some cases it might take a little longer, but if you build it in to the strategy all the way along, it will go more smoothly.
Well, shout out to Preston in Winnipeg. I mean, that sounds awesome. Way to go.
Mm-hmm.
Way to go.
Yeah.
So that was bed rest,
That was
right?
bed
That was
rest.
the case study bed rest. So people who want to read more about that can look at that one.
And the other one, Warrior Strong, was a much smaller project done in Sault Ste. Marie, Ontario. And it was a lot of the story took place in a gymnasium. It was a kind of Hoosiers type story, little basketball team that could. And that we probably spent 3/4 of the story, 2/3 of the story in the gym. So that became our focus. And the gymnasium, it was kind of in a nice old school and all that, but the gymnasium had a mezzanine where the bleachers and stuff where people would watch the game from, but it was really large. And they didn't really have the budget to fill it with people, nor would it make sense because the story took place in a small town. And, even though, anyway, so that was part of the narrative part. So I proposed dividing the mezzanine, like almost only showing 1/3 of the mezzanine and creating a wall across the whole thing. And into which we could also put windows to provide a lighting source because there were no windows in the gym. So again, the problem, much lower budget. We didn't really have the money to build it, but even more so, we didn't have really the manpower. Like there wasn't local teams to build that kind of. It needed to be at 90 feet long by 10 feet, 12 feet tall, I think, and to fill in that part of the mezzanine. And so I just posted on DGC Ontario, Directors Guild of Canada, Ontario Art Department Facebook group. I said, hey, does anyone have any flats? I need about, 25 4x8, 4x10 flats. And someone answered, someone who actually know, but that's beside the point. Someone else could have been the person that answered, responded, said, yeah, I think I might have some. Give me a call. So I did. They were on a series and they weren't finishing the series, but they were finishing a certain amount of what they had built in the past. So they had these flats that they just needed to get rid of. So even though I was in Sault Ste. Marie, which is like a 7-hour drive from Toronto, a couple of trucks were going from down to Toronto or from Toronto back up to Sault Ste. Marie with camera equipment, lighting equipment, and stuff like that. So they picked up the flats and on one of those trucks, and we got the flats for free. And there was a local guy who could certainly assemble the flats and put them in place. And, a couple of local people did that for us. Yeah. So those flats were free. And after we were done, again, on that one, much smaller show, but again, everyone was kind of, yeah, but let's do what we can. While we were, putting these walls up, I think it was someone on the show, one of the guys helping build them contacted a local theater company and asked if they'd like the flats. So yes, they did want the flats, and hopefully they're still getting use out of them. If I was to do this again, I would have personally, or like at least said, okay, just please make sure that if you only need them for one show or like one season, that somehow you pass them on to someone else. Because I think that's a really important quotient. If you pass on goods, assets, materials, whatever, to someone, students or a film course or anyone that needs them, that there's some conversation about, okay, now it's your responsibility to do something with them, because otherwise it's just free stuff and it could just end up in the dump just a little bit later than it was originally going to be.
Right. So actually say the words, when you're done with this, please pass it on or something like that.
Yeah, please avoid everything you can to avoid putting it into landfill, because I think that is a shared responsibility. So if the free stuff is not great unless there's that joint responsibility. I think it's part of it. So anyway, going back to the Warrior Strong thing, the flats went to the local theater company. And again, if I was to do this again, I would make sure we followed up with that or maybe had that conversation. And we had leftover paint we gave to them as well. And and then even though we built that, and there was like set dressing and there was like chloroplast and all that kind of stuff. There were various things we needed to build. Again, we donated it to the local theater company, and we actually had I think 2 or 3 2-foot by 2-foot cardboard boxes full of stuff that actually went to the dump at the end of that show from the art department. That is.
Wow, that's like not much at all.
Oh, that's pretty good, isn't it?
Yeah, that's amazing.
I mean, set dressing and things like that can often, they go to Habitat for Humanity, or they can be given to New Canadians, that kind of thing. So set decoration typically doesn't go to the dump. It's mostly the construction stuff. But we tried with the few things we had, whether it's flats, extra paint, that kind of thing. We did try to find homes for them. So
it's funny here in Vancouver. We see little things from movies pop up all over town, as folks, very talented creators, and there's no longer a use for these, giant sized mushrooms from somewhere, or
in a restaurant somewhere.
Yeah, they show up all over various events and various things. It's actually pretty cute.
Yeah, that's good. That's good.
Um, so you've been doing this for a long time. So what's next? What gets us to the next phase of sustainability entertainment?
Well, I think normalizing it. I mean, that's kind of a broad reference, but I think that's the next thing. It's just normalizing it. Like things like you don't drink and drive, you don't smoke inside. You have to be respectful to people. You can't call people names. That's normalizing good behavior. And I think that's really where we have to be at next. So it's not like a one solution phrase I'm going to give you, but I think those things when I started, and certainly, I mean, probably to some degree when you guys started, those things all existed, right? Smoking inside, drinking and driving, bad behavior on set, harassment on set, all those things aren't acceptable anymore. So I think we have to dovetail that attitude to sustainability and climate action. It's just, to me, that's so basic.
Yeah. Really integrated in, normalize it.
So that it isn't like, oh, we're being sustainable. It's just, that's what you are. Like, it isn't like,
right.
It's sort of like, the arguments of like, it's not a woman director, it's a director. It's like, it's not like a.
Right. It's so funny because I've always been one to like shun labels. Like I really, for whatever reason, I don't like them. I feel like they're confining, it's kind of like a fixed way of thinking if you're like subscribed to a particular label, whatever it is. And it's interesting hearing you say that because like, it's not just a sustainable production, it's just like how we do things, right?
That's the next place we have to be.
Yeah.
And there's
Absolutely.
other things we have to try that have to happen before we get there, but it's happening. I think it is happening.
Yeah, we shouldn't still be having the same conversation over and over again in 10 years.
And I think in talking to various conversations I'm on, and certainly I've even heard this from producers. So you might say quite often these conversations like, oh, well, what's next is the producers and production managers have to get behind this and budget it in. Okay, that is a step. And so it becomes the norm in that way. And does that mean the sustainability rep comes in and helps bring everyone together? Maybe that's all part of it. But yeah, sure. A lot of people say, well, the producers and production managers have to just put it on the budget and make this something that we're all expected to do. But also, I think producers, I've heard this from a few producers, they really want like tax incentives or something, or guidelines, so that it makes it even that much more of an imperative. So we're all kind of working within systems. I have my system in the art department, and then there's the system on the show, and then there's the system in the industry. But, just as tax credits have been effective in amplifying industries in different parts of the world, like, from the big centers, like in Ontario and LA, like different places have that. I think that's what's needed. And I'm not that's not part of my world. I don't know, how laws and stuff completely come into being. I've heard, oh, that takes a really long time. That's not going to happen for years. And I'm thinking, wow, how can that? Hasn't this been a conversation really like for like a decade now? Like I'm shocked when I hear that oh, that's not going to tax incentives.
Why not? Yeah, it's like why not? Like we could really move that needle.
You could tax the waste. I mean, it should be an incentive to reduce waste. right? Versus,
Yeah.
and you
or
pay,
the carbon footprint or whatever. Like people, do the Alberts and they're starting to carbon track their productions. But
Yeah.
is it just an FYI, or is there like an is there a reward for for actually coming in at a certain level?
Yeah.
So that's I think that's really an important next to help normalize it. People, we can all kind of chip away in our own way, but and I'm kind of repeating what I've heard producers say, that they
Yeah.
need.
But I also like, yes, I am also one to say like we really need producers and, production managers behind this. And I do really believe that. But I also believe in the power of the department head too, because you as a department head went to your producer and said, "Hey, I'd like to approach my stuff in this way." And he was totally okay with it as long as, you know,
I did.
it didn't go over budget, right? So like even coming from like, the department head position and putting forth an idea or plan for how you want to do something, I think that's really important as well.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think it is completely important. So I think I'm all for like just chipping away in the best way I possibly can in my department. And our department, production designer, you're working with like really three or four departments: construction and scenic paints and set decoration and costumes to a certain point, and props. So yeah, that's a big chunk of filmmaking crew. So yes, I believe very strongly we can do a lot on our own as well. Yeah.
And I know, I had a bit of a prep chat ahead of this and we had sent you a prep doc and whatnot. And one of the fun questions that we had in there, and I'm going to ask you because you made a comment during our prep chat.
I thought
So,
you would ask me.
um, so what what character would you be if you were in a movie? I'm really I'm
You
curious
know
what
what?
your answer is.
Mary Poppins.
Mary Poppins.
nice.
Yeah,
Good.
I mean, it goes back to it's just like she had the skill and the knack to make learning new things and looking at the world in different ways, making it fun and magical. So I know, like as adults and as kind of like earn it in our earnestness of trying to do sustainability, a lot of people just go, "Oh, there she goes again," or whatever. It's so having that magic ability to keep people engaged and make things sound fun and possible. Yeah, Mary Poppins.
There you go.
Love it.
Spoonful of sugar.
So another question that we do ask everybody
Mhm.
is if you were to create a new playbook, and think about it like guiding principles about sustainability and entertainment, what would be first on your list or even top three?
I would just think circularity. It's really important.
Yeah.
And it's kind of to kind of what's the word? Not quite anyway. To be kind of metaphoric about it, it's an all-encompassing idea, and it amplifies the connectiveness between everything, and not just in the film industry, but everything. And I think it's very possible, like for us to be
Yeah.
circular. So I think that's, and it's funny, and this is kind of anecdotal, but I went back to school 10 years ago and did my master's. And my thesis project and my master's was in interdisciplinary art, media, and design. I'm a visual artist from a visual art practice. But after doing a lot of reading, thinking, and having worked with themes in my visual art practice, and then just thinking in general, and I wasn't again through the sustainability lens. My thesis project was called Deep Circularity, and it was a term that I'd read about through my critical reading related to visual art world in a way, but it's really more philosophical world too. So I know it sounds kind of lofty to say that, but I think it had a resonance, and it was kind of in advance of me starting to articulate this within circular design build language or sustainability language. It just again it was all about how things are connected: body, mind, rhythms, pulses, the world's larger, the world's smaller. So to me, that's I know it isn't a necessarily useful tool to tell someone in terms of like what the film industry needs, but conceptually and practically as well. I think it kind of covers the range, conceptual, practical, philosophical,
I love
economical,
it.
Beautiful.
economical too.
Wonderful.
Yeah, I
It's
love
it's
it.
it's almost it's very much our time right now here on the planet, and our realization, yeah, that we are all interconnected. Um, and yeah, it's absolutely, and Zena and I, why we work here is because we really deeply believe that the film and entertainment industry can be that leading industry, to really showcase this for all other industries around the world.
Absolutely. I mean, it can be so influential, right? With the through that the popular culture lens, it can be so influential. And there's many ways to do that in the storytelling vein of things, but again, behind the scenes, we have to also live that narrative out, enact that.
Totally.
You know.
Totally. And there's just so many possibilities.
Mhm.
So, I mean, just really thank you, Marian. Thank you for
Thank you.
sharing your insights and giving us a bit of a window into how you think about this as a production designer and how you approach your work. Really
Well,
appreciate it.
I hope it was helpful, and again, if there, I mean, if you have any other follow-up questions you want to ask or anything, yeah, just happy to
Yeah,
bring it forth. Yeah,
maybe we'll get some from our listeners and we'll pass them your
sure,
way.
absolutely happy to. Always happy to respond in that way too. Well, again, one thing I'll just go back to TGC Green. It hasn't really. I mean, they have links like members in action. So that's again, like people are encouraged, like whether it's a small thing you're doing or something bigger, like just sharing information is so important.
Absolutely. That's
Totally.
critical.
Yeah, yeah.
Totally. Well, thank you, Marian. We really
Okay.
Thank you.
appreciate it.
Thanks, and thanks for having me. Really appreciate it.
That was a great chat. I just love how calm and calculated, and she just knows what she's doing. Steady hand at the wheel.
I know. I know. I really like this conversation because it got into really practical elements
Yeah.
here. I mean, she had case studies and she talked through exactly what she was doing with those flats. And I don't know, it just really brings it down to the practical, concrete level, and people could, really take away something from it.
And things that she's doing every day, right? And that's
Oh,
what I
yeah.
love about all these conversations. It's an everyday thing. Um, I love that idea of literally verbalizing and passing on this material and saying, okay, now you're responsible for this material or this couch or this piece of equipment, and you've got to make sure it doesn't go into the dump.
That's right. It just like that puts the responsibility
Yeah,
on the next person. It puts it square in their mind. So they're not kind of thinking flippantly like, oh, great, I got this for free. I can do whatever I want with it. No, this is a thing that has value that we are bestowing on you to do something great with. And I really liked that piece.
yeah,
That I love that she thinks that way, and she's like, yeah, that's what I would do different. And she's so humble. Like, that's what I would do different
yeah,
next time. And, we really need to be normalizing all of it. Just
yeah.
really enjoy talking with her.
I could when we were talking, I could envision her thrifting in antique shops and bargaining with the shop owners, and because that's really, I mean, a lot of these sets are throwbacks to a previous time,
Yeah,
unless you're doing sort of a space-based theme where you need to make everything from scratch. But I think that's it's a really fun department to be in.
totally, totally. I want to get someone on from construction so we can get that compared, the way
Absolutely.
they work together, that link. So, um, anyway, well, really enjoyed talking with her. Hope you all enjoyed listening to that conversation. Write us if you want to listen to more. If you've got people like that in your world, we'd love to hear who they are and maybe talk to them as well.
Yeah,
Thanks for
absolutely.
listening.
Thanks.
Hey, listeners. If you have a story about innovation and sustainability in entertainment, please get in touch with us at tieinpodcast@gmail.com. That's TIEIN podcast, all one word, @gmail.com. We'd love to hear from you. we may ask you to be a guest on the show.
If you like today's conversation and want to hear more, please like us and subscribe wherever you listen to your podcasts.
Our designer is Aaliyah Kane. Music is by Peter Chapman. Our producer is Colin Miller.